we hold is the Abbott Elementary.
Mhm.
Oops. And so, and I believe that Abbott Elementary is a great tool to mitigate the learning and opportunity gap between subgroups.
Mhm.
And so that's why that was at the forefront of the vision statement. And then if students can become proficient in basic math skills and in reading, then we know that that is connected to student success. So those two things give students access to learning at any grade level. And so it's very important for students to be proficient readers in order to be able to do anything, right?
Yes,
And
I
it's
do.
also attributed to student success. So that's why those two things are there. And then the second thing about how we make that happen is if students don't feel connected to school, which we're definitely seeing right now through the
Right.
virtual
Yes.
learning platform,
Mhm.
they don't learn, and we're
Right.
seeing that. I just had a conversation with a teacher and she was saying, I feel like relationships is my strength and that's the part I'm struggling with the most. And that's
Right.
why the kids aren't learning. And so, and then in terms of children feeling challenged, I think oftentimes when you work with students of poverty or you work with EL students, there is a notion to make things easier
Right.
or, to just like lower your expectations. And I think the belief system at Pachapa is that we don't lower expectations, we raise our expectations and we give
Right.
students the tools and strategies to meet those expectations.
Yeah.
And then the last one, just being a champion. When I started as an administrator, I don't know, I honed in on that championship mentality and I started
Mhm.
reading about coaches that that worked with championship teams and just kind of what their philosophy was. When you look at John
Right.
Wooden or like the coach at Alabama and then the coach at Clemson, when you look at that mentality of what they do as coaches and what players do to become champions, champions are not necessarily the best at the sport. It's the effort and
Right.
energy that they put into it that
Right.
makes
Right.
the difference. And it's their belief system that they can do it that
Right.
makes the difference. And
Right.
so those three C's, and also being a Baptist preacher's daughter, I just like those three C's. Um, they're easy to remember, they're easy to communicate. So those three C's were just super important in terms of making the vision a reality.
Okay. And you kind of touched on this, but I need to ask specifically. So, how does Pachapa's vision support equity for all students?
Well, Avid, I think, is one of the great equalizers. And so when
Mm-hmm.
you give students the tools to be organized with their thoughts and their materials and things of that nature, and you give teachers strategies to teach that, then I think you're providing the tools to mitigate that learning opportunity gap for students. And like I said, those basic skills, if you can get every student proficient in those two areas, you're going to find that um, you're going to mitigate that gap.
Okay. What equity gaps have you identified as a principal at our school academically? What equity gaps do you see?
So academically, our EL students achieve below the rest of our students, as well as our students of low SES. That's a gap that we're closing, but it is something that we see. African Americans are not a significant subgroup at our school, but there also is a learning gap there.
Most of our ELs are low socio as well, correct?
True, right.
And that's true of our Hispanic. They are also mostly okay.
Lowest, yes, yes.
Okay.
So about a little over 70% of our population is low SES.
Hmm.
And so you often find that they'll be in more than one group. They'll be
Right.
duplicated.
Right. Okay. So, what equity gaps do you see in terms of like socio-emotional? Do you see any other equity gaps?
A lot of our students come from trauma. And so they have had traumatic events happen in their lives, whether that comes from poverty or it comes from just a significant life event that has happened in their life. And so that impacts their how they interact socially emotionally. So it impacts how they deal with their emotions and also how they express their emotions. So I definitely would say I see that at the school. Also, I think that the language barriers that students face, and not just because they're second language learners.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's just because of a lack of exposure to language. So that can be
Yeah.
your poverty students that just have not been exposed to books, that have not been exposed to a lot of oral language. There's a big gap between like our middle class students and our students that are from low SES in terms of just how they express themselves. And so that's why we have that emphasis on, speaking in complete sentences, um, using
Academic
more
vocabulary.
academic vocabulary, all of that we have to put in place because of those gaps.
So that's kind of answered the next question, which was why do you think there's such a gap between like our white population and the ELs? You kind of answered that, and you answered, which was I was going to ask you like what are some of the things we've done as a school site? So implementing academic vocabulary, and also like those other programs, like the what is that? Okay, go. I'll let you tell me. So what are the other things that we have done as a school site to help bridge that gap between the ELs and the whites in terms of that achievement gap?
So for our K-3 students, we have a strong intervention program, which is based on what we call gateway strategies, which is based on Orton Gillingham.
Right.
And so the Orton Gillingham strategies are extremely effective for building students' basic reading skills. But at our school, something that's a little different in tweaking that is that our early intervention doesn't just focus on phonics and getting kids to be able to read. We always pair that with comprehension. And so making sure that students not just can't just word call, but that students understand that
Right.
reading always leads to meaning. Um, I think that's a big piece of what we've done. The work that we do with integrated and designated ELD helps to mitigate that. And then at the upper grades, we have the advanced phonics program that focuses on students understanding the morphology of words. And so that helps to build their comprehension and also build their vocabulary. So academic vocabulary and building just conversational vocabulary has also been a big emphasis.
Isn't okay? Isn't there a sixth grade program? There's something that's specifically sixth grade that I don't know if it's on Clever or is there something? I thought there was some program that I thought was specifically sixth grade. I can't remember what the name was though.
So all of our students in grades K-5 used Lexia. And
Yeah.
then in sixth grade, it transfers over to a program called Power Up.
Okay.
And Power Up has a focus on vocabulary development and reading comprehension. It's just more academically appropriate for your older students.
Got it. Okay, so we have things in place to help us bridge that gap. What successes have you seen, and what obstacles do you see that we still face?
The successes that I've seen as academic gains. And so, it kind of ebbs and flows. So one year we saw significant academic gains with our test scores. Um, and then we took a little bit of a dip last year. But
Hmm.
for the most part, I have seen increased performance in closing that gap. Our distance from three had closed significantly that second year that I was here.
Hmm.
Um, the challenge is maintaining. So once you make a gain, it's maintaining that, but also adding in wherever the new deficit is. And you have to maintain, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like you
Yeah.
focus on ELA and then math goes down. You focus on
Yes.
math, then ELA goes down. So it's being able to maintain it all.
All right. So before I ask the specific math question, what effect do you think learner engagement, chronic absenteeism. We don't really have suspension is not very high for us. That's not a real big factor, but the other two are. So, what effect do you think learner engagement, chronic absenteeism have when it comes to looking at our ELs and bridging that gap? What impact do you think those two have?
I believe that the learner engagement is somewhat of a concern just because we need to address part of like the cultural proficiency aspect of
Hmm.
our instruction. We need to understand our customer basically.
Right.
And so we have a very diverse student population, and we have to understand that and value that and infuse that into our instruction, which is really our next step in bridging that equity gap. And I think that will increase learner engagement when students can see themselves in the curriculum, when students can feel valued and respected regardless of what their background is. Um, in terms of chronic absenteeism, one of the issues that I think we have there is that our parents sometimes are in survival mode and some of their basic needs are not being met. And so that
Mhm.
trickles down to the kids. And that's why you have students that don't necessarily make it to school every day, or maybe the appearance is that the parents don't value education. Everyone values education. You wouldn't have any parent ever say that I don't want my kid to get a good education.
Right. Right.
But it's understanding the steps and tools to getting a good education and making sure that we are um, ensuring that all families have that sense of belonging and sense of connectedness to the school. So that's really my site goal for this year is working on that piece.
Right. I do think you do a good job of connecting. I really do. And just helping us stay connected, and you know what I mean?
I'm slipping this year though. I'm like, I was
Yeah,
like,
I think
it's
we're
so
all we kind
hard.
of can't help it. You know what I mean? We're all
I
slipping, but
know.
I think you still have done a good job. Even when I think about those first 2 months that we were home, like from March to May, just checking in and making, a lot of people you didn't hear from them again. You know what I mean? I've heard a lot of teachers say that, and I think you really did a great job of
Thank
making
you.
that effort. So,
Thank
give
you.
yourself some slack on that. I mean, we're all feeling like we can do, better, and we're trying to figure out how to do
Right.
that too.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this in terms of math. So, as long as you've been there, and probably over the past 10 years, our data has shown that our math scores are lower than language arts. But when I first came to Pachapa, it was a reverse. Our math was always
Mm,
high. But I mean, now we've had about 10 years of the reverse. So my
right.
question is, why do you think our math data has been consistently lower than our ELA data? And why do you think that is? And then what do you think we need to do to bridge that gap?
I believe the math data is lower than the ELA data because there was a transition to more conceptual understanding of math as opposed to um, procedural understanding of math concepts. And so, in order for students to do well with that, one, we have to build the capacity of the teachers to teach that. And then two, we have to build the capacity of the students. So
Mhm.
it's really tied to that reading comprehension and then being able to problem solve and critically think and break things down, which is a really difficult skill to teach, that conceptual understanding. Because now you're not just asking kids what 4 times 3 is, we're
Right,
asking kids, how do you apply that to, wallpapering a wall,
right, right,
and so getting back to what we said before, those language deficits that our students have are going to impact their ability to be able to be successful with the conceptual math.
right, right. Very good. Okay, so are there any other, when you think about Pachapa as the administrator, it's your baby, what are your thoughts? Like, what, um, I guess, do you see, where do you see us going? What do you see us working on? What do you see um, as changing in our culture, for the positive or the negative, academically in our culture, just about Pachapa overall.
Overall, I always tell you I love Pachapa. I think that it's a great community of learners, both the students, the staff, and the students, the staff, and the parents. But where I see us going is really being a guiding light for other schools about how to affect change in all populations, right? So we do a really great job with early intervention, but it's like how can we make sure that we're sustaining that through 6th grade? And
Right.
then also, how can we make sure that a student who comes to us on level remains on level and beyond? So a lot of emphasis has not been placed at Pachapa on enrichment and on those students that are above grade level.
Mhm.
And so that really is one of my areas of concern when we think about how we could really solidify Pachapa's instructional program
Mhm.
is making sure that we deal with all ends of the spectrum. So students below grade level, all the way through students who are above grade level. Because right now I feel like we miss those kids that are above grade level. And then sometimes even our kids that are at grade level fall below because we don't place enough emphasis on maintaining their skills or accelerating their skills.
Right. Right.
So much emphasis
It,
is placed on intervention.
it is. It's almost like that squeaky wheel. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because they're low, and that focus. I totally agree, and that's something I'm looking at even now with this distance learning. You know what I
Right.
mean? Trying to make sure that these other ones stay, have enrichment, stay motivated, and then you're like
Mhm.
pulling these other little groups along, like click here, and you're
Right.
trying to keep them from like drooling. The other one's like, oh my God, please. So it is.
Exactly.
Let me ask
Exactly.
you this about our parents. Um, we know all of our parents care about their kids. What what needs do you see that the parents of our EL students have that are different from our white population, and how are we able to, or how are we trying to meet the needs of our EL parents?
We try to meet the needs of our EL parents through our ELAC and through our parent organizations. But where we lack in that is respecting their language differences.
Mhm.
Um, Gosh, that's a hard one because I feel like sometimes with our Latino parents, they trust the school so much that we're doing the right thing that they don't
Mhm.
advocate for their students the same way that our
Right,
non-Hispanic parents do.
right.
And so, what I would love to be able to teach our parents to do is how to advocate for their students. Um, that's why I've talked a little bit, I hinted a little bit about our site goal. Our site goal for equity, it seems really simple, but I think it's super important to make a difference. And the site goal is that 100% of our EL students will have an effective communication pathway that allows for two-way communication with the school.
Mm,
Because right now, what we're finding is that so many of our parents, like, they don't have a working email, they don't have a working phone, they don't have, and they're just like, what do you mean there's a book pickup this week? I didn't know anything about that. or or they have questions and they don't have feel like they have a way to ask those questions. They
right.
don't have a way to communicate with the teacher. So, and then one of the things that was super eye opening to me last year with one of our African American students was I had worked really hard to have a relationship with this kiddo. on campus. And so I talked to him, I played basketball with him, I check in, say, hey, how you doing? Whenever I saw him on campus, the mother's impression was that I didn't have a relationship with him at all, because the only time she heard from me was when he was in trouble.
Right.
And so my goal is for not just as an administrator to create more positive connections with parents,
Right.
but for teachers as well, to just have a positive connection with a parent, with a teacher, with a parent, to say, hey, Johnny did a great job in this today. Just wanted to let you know.
Right.
And then that opens up that dialogue with the parent, and they don't have to be on the defensive.
Right.
So you'll see that as a part of the plan we're going to start to talk about, because it's a multifaceted plan that goes along with that effective communication pathway.
I think that was pretty much it. You're a great talker.